Pat Harrigan, first, thank you for doing this. I've been excited to get to meet you and have a conversation. So you just to sort of tee it up a little bit here, you're running for the congressional seat, District 10, right?
Yes.
Which
10th
is Patrick
Carolina.
McHenry's vacant. Is that
Yeah,
right?
that is
Okay.
correct. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
And it's not the area that he's representing right now.
Right.
It's the area that he would have represented underneath the new map system
Okay.
for U.S. Congress in North Carolina. So it's a little bit different, a little bit hard to understand, but yeah, Catawba and Hickory right at the center of it all.
Stuff does get confusing for the voter too. I mean, when you look at these lines and how they change over time, also it can be confusing. So backing up, so here, good looking guy, great family. I've seen your family online. Good looking, healthy family, successful entrepreneur. Why spend your time and money doing this when you could probably be doing things a lot more fun in sunnier climates? And sort of the fruits of your labor kind of thing. What motivates someone to kind of take this path? And I really do want to go back and even hear about like what you were like as a child, quite frankly. But where does that fire in your belly kind of come from?
I'll tell you what, if it's not somebody like me, then who would it be, right? At the end of the day. And that's something that we are very um particularly back through my time in the special forces, right? Like we all view ourselves as folks that decided to step up and other people didn't, right? It doesn't make us better. It just makes us different. And when you ask like, hey, why am I doing this? The reason is because number one, who else would do it? And number two, the stakes are really, really high. I'm totally convinced that my two daughters, Reagan and McKinley, they're 4 and 6 years old, are not going to have the same opportunities in their lives that I had in mine. Like I don't even think that's a question. I think it's a done deal if we don't change the course of this country, change the course of our world very quickly here. And so to the extent that, look, as a concerned parent, I'm a concerned citizen. I care about the future of my kids. I care about the future of everyone's kids because at the end of the day, if we don't set the conditions for folks to have successful opportunities, not necessarily outcomes, right? But to drive their own outcomes. If we don't even set those conditions, and I don't do that for your kids, then it's not going to happen for my kids either. And so, to some extent, this fire in the belly that you talk about started with me when Afghanistan fell. I
Mhm.
really just could not comprehend how we could have Vietnam 2.0 after so many decades. I mean, like our president, Joe Biden, I mean, look, he was around during the downfall of Vietnam. And then to have 50 years worth of public service and then sit at the top of the hill as the commander in chief in charge of everything that we have done over the last 20 plus years, fighting the war on terror in Afghanistan, and to let it end that way was absolutely catastrophic for the free world, not just the United States of America. And it really frustrated me because it's not that all of that work and all of that sacrifice, and there is a lot of people that sacrificed a lot more than me, right? We lost a couple thousand folks over there. There's folks that are in and around my campaign that deployed, uh, you know, over a dozen times. I only deployed twice.
Mhm.
And so despite the 18 and a half months that I spent there, what really frustrated me about the outcome in Afghanistan was that it condemned the next generation of Americans to conflict. And what folks don't understand on a broader picture is that when we are weak, it brings about conflict. And not because we choose to bring conflict onto ourselves, but it's because our adversaries see weakness and they see
Mhm.
opportunity and they take advantage of it. And boy, isn't the world burning with our adversaries taking advantage of us right now.
I,
And
you know, it's interesting. I mean, there was a lot to unpack what you just said, right? And you're running for a congressional seat, and so I'm sure that you do a lot of interviews, television, radio, podcasts, otherwise, where maybe some of these. and I don't say talking points disrespectfully, Pat. That's not what I mean. But these
Sure.
topics become, you know, almost second nature for you. You're so passionate about it. You're super educated. You've gotten your hands dirty with some of this. But there's also something I'm hearing. And so take me as the normal average Joe, right? The guy that doesn't go down super deep rabbit holes on every particular topic, but on the surface sees a lot of dissension, and not a lot of collaboration. And I don't just mean within our political system, but I mean sort of as we view the rest of the world, right? Like I have friends and colleagues that go to different parts of the world and come back and say, you know, it's really amazing how certain parts of the world treat their children, how it's more of a community-based platform, from how they invest in their kids, how they educate their kids, and then also how we take care of the elderly, how we take care of our grandparents and our parents as they start to get older. But we don't really learn from these other countries. We're not collaborating very well. And inside of our own country, we end up fighting about, you know, I know what's right, you know what's right, and so we never truly collaborate. How coming from the military, where that's not really an option, right? I mean, you sort of at some level, I think, have to be willing to listen to other people within on your team, right? And maybe have to listen to others on the ground. How do you sort of forge an environment where there's better collaboration to get to these solutions?
Yeah, the answer to your question is you just have to lead by example, right? Because, you know, oftentimes in the military, like you're ordered to do something, right? That might not be popular. You know, your
Right.
guys might really not like it, but you just got to figure out a way to do it. And at the end of the day, yeah, you may be ordered to do something, but there's always this kind of like gray area where you can work in and kind of shape the outcome in the way that you feel like is the best way to shape the outcome given all the stakeholders involved, right? How can you meet the mission, but also maybe accomplish this, and this that, you know, protects your people, that enables them to have an ability to have a greater strategic impact in some way, shape, or form. You know, and you know the list goes on and on and on in terms of you kind of molding your own situation around the outcome that you want to see happen. And that's just where, like, look, you kind of hang your hat on, like, do we have good leadership or do we not have good leadership? We want to trust that we have good leadership and that they're leading us in the right direction to the right outcomes. But kind of getting back to, like, you know, finish the concept of why I'm running, like, it's not just about Afghanistan and that failed outcome. Like, you look around us, we have a cascading series of failed outcomes across our country, across our culture, across this entire world right now. And you know, the world's on fire. And so when you say you got these talking points, you've got all these different things that you've got to consider, and you talk about this all the time. I hate talking points because the problem with our culture today is that, you know, we expect that we can communicate clear and comprehensive policy in talking points, you know, and however, like, I'm not even on Twitter. My campaign's on Twitter, but, you know,
Hmm.
where it is like 220 characters or less, right? Now, like, that's not possible. These are incredibly complex issues that you really have to have a very deep understanding of history. You have to have in terms of, you know, how things have played out in the past along similar policy lines, because there's nothing new under the sun. It's a very biblical, ecclesiastical perspective, right? But there's a lot of truth in it. And so you also have to understand how we came to where we are today within our current environment and the people who are involved, the various motivations that exist. Certainly, money being one of them, almost across the board in every instance.
Yep.
And then you've got to have a broad understanding of principle that says, okay, hey, within the realm of possibility of what we can get done here, how is this likely to end up? What is the end state? What is the most likely? What is the most dangerous end state associated with the route we're going to go down here? And all five alarm fires in my mind are saying right now it's world war, and the people that, you know, the average American does not understand how close we are to that. Because we like to live in our peaceful little lives, kind of not worry about what's beyond our own material experience in this country. But the world's absolutely on fire. We're suffering from weak leadership across the board. And I'm not just talking about in the presidency. we've got weak leadership across our entire government. And if we don't start putting principled leaders of character into those positions, this country is going to fail, and this world is going to be in an awful lot of pain that it doesn't need to be in because it lacks American leadership.
What let's go back. You talked about Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Who was Pat when he was 10 years old? I mean, what were and what were your folks like? I mean, at some point you mentioned Afghanistan as a trigger, but there was a trigger long before that. So I'm curious, what was Pat, what was Pat like when he was 10?
You know, I was an athlete.
What was your game?
Like I played football, I played basketball, I played baseball. I don't like to admit it, but I played tennis too.
Why don't you like to admit that?
I was a great swimmer. But like
so there's a story to the tennis thing, which by the way, we hear sirens in the background. You might hear that. So as the world is falling apart, just know apparently in downtown Hickory, something's happening.
No, it's all good. And there's nothing about tennis players, right? Because tennis is a great game. You can play it all your life, but there's a difference between individual sports and team sports. And sometimes guys that, played individual sports have a certain type of personality, whereas guys that play team sports have a different type of personality.
So would you say the same thing about golf?
Golf's a little bit different. I feel like golf is an individual sport while also being kind of a team sport. Maybe it's all
So you just lost the tennis. You just lost the tennis vote, is what you just lost, right?
I know. I don't want to lose the tennis vote. Come on, guys.
Okay, so 10-year-old Pat was an athlete, super competitive, clearly.
Yep, I was, and that was pretty much the only thing that was on my mind when I was younger. I mean, like I was, wanted to be a professional athlete. Really started to excel in basketball. Obviously I was tall.
How tall are you?
I'm 6'7" and about 230 pounds. And it's hard to see in the pictures, but every time someone meets me, they're like, holy smokes, I had no idea you were this big of a guy.
Well, we talked about potentially trying to do this live and actually going for a walk. I'm kind of glad we didn't. I'm not sure I want to walk next to you. I'd have to have some stilts or something as we go. I'm nowhere near 6'7".
At the end of the day, I was a good athlete. I just made for a big target in the special forces. So I was always the first guy to get shot at.
That's great.
And I had a really hard time jumping out of small aircraft.
I'm bouncing around now. I know like in the Naval Academy, there's rules, or I think, right, there's rules around height, or there used to be height restrictions. Are there no height restrictions?
It depends on what you want to do. So like one of the things that I really had a passion for was flying. Like I wanted to be an aviator. And, I realized very quickly after I got there, that all the platforms that I wanted to fly, I couldn't fly. I was just too tall. And now I've always had this secret desire to fly. And so I am about to do my check ride for my private pilot's license. But
right on.
It was absolutely crazy trying to find a small plane that I could actually fit in. To do this now that 15 years fast forward and here we are,
right?
So I get why they had the restrictions.
That's interesting. Okay, so 10-year-old Pat's an athlete. Were there things? You went to West Point, right?
I did. Yes.
So where did that motivation start early as a goal for you, or when did that?
It really didn't. Honestly, like I came. My mom was a traditional Catholic and my dad was a traditional Protestant. They're both older. So they're, like I'm 36, my parents are, in their 80s. And so, they kind of had me later in life, and they kind of decided from a religious perspective that, agree to disagree and didn't really have or put down a faith program.
Okay.
And so I came to Christ actually kind of through on my own through a Billy Graham crusade out in San Diego, actually.
Okay.
And so long story short, I felt called to go to West Point, but it was not something that happened when I was younger. I came to Christ when I was 17, junior in high school. And so from that perspective, it's something that developed later. And right as I was about to make the decision on where I was going to go college wise.
Okay. So you go to West Point.
Yep.
What I for someone who didn't, probably couldn't have had those options, but for someone who didn't, what was that a bit of a shock for you when you went there?
It's actually funny that you say that because it almost wasn't an option for me. I actually didn't get in, and I kind of pigeonholed myself a little bit because it was the only place that I applied. I
Okay.
was just like so convinced this is where I needed to go, and
Is
I got.
that who you are generally though? Like you set a goal and you just don't put other plan B options in place?
Yeah, 100%,
Yeah.
because it gives you no other option other than succeeding, right? And that's like worked throughout my entire life. And I'm sure that a lot of entrepreneurs that interview are wired kind of the same way, where it's just like, look, we're not going for broke. We're going to be smart about what we do,
Yeah.
but we are absolutely going to accomplish the task.
Right. Right. Right.
And
Right.
there is no room for failure. But I actually didn't get in, and I wrote a letter to the dean of admissions, and I said, I wrote like a 4-page letter of like, hey, this is why you made a mistake, and
Wow.
respectfully, right? But these are all the reasons like that I'm supposed to be there, and y'all need to figure out how to get one more person in. And they sent me a letter letting me in.
So just the
So
fact that that letter even got read by someone who was in a position to make a decision is pretty remarkable, right?
I know. And like it probably wouldn't work that way now. You know what I mean? I mean, this was 15 years ago.
Right.
And there's probably no room for something like that given all the different requirements. And, you got to be really careful from, all these different perspectives now. That probably wouldn't have even been a possibility today, but that's what happened to me. And there we went.
So you go through West Point. At what point did you get deployed?
So right after I graduated West Point, commissioned into the Army, and then I branched infantry.
Okay.
And, I ended up going down to Fort Benning for all my kind of initial officer training. And that was supposed to take like a year. And it only took me about kind of 6, 7 months to get through everything.
And why is that? Is that because you pushed through it or because they're like, I'm curious, is that
Yes and
abnormal?
yes and no. It is a little abnormal, and I just ended up in a position where I had no breaks in between all my different courses that I had to take, and then there were a couple slots that opened up a couple months early for Ranger School, and I volunteered to hop into that, like,
Okay.
which was probably a mistake because it was in January Ranger School class, which is like the dead of winter, and I mean, oh my gosh, I'd never felt cold like that in my entire life. But we made it through, and flew through in like 62 days. And then I wasn't supposed to go to my first duty station until midsummer, end of summer, and I ended up going up there in March.
Okay.
uh, and so it was real quick, real fast. And then we went into a deployment cycle. Right after I got up there, that was my first station up in Alaska. There's a funny story there, but I don't want to run out of time on you, so
No, I want to hear it. Let's go. I want to
okay.
hear the story.
So coming out of West Point, everything is done on an order of merit list. So what
Okay.
you want in terms of the branch in the military, infantry, aviation, field artillery, engineers, that sort of thing. And then you have an order of merit for the postings. So where you want to go in the world, right? And so Alaska was somewhere that I wanted to go, and I was number 2 on the OML for infantry. And they had 2 slots for this elite unit down at Fort Richardson, which is the airborne unit. That's kind of where every young infantryman wants to go. They want to go airborne. They want to jump out of airplanes, do the hot stuff, right?
Okay.
And then they had 17 slots for Fort Wainwright, Alaska, which is farther up north and is like a mechanized unit, not super fun, or so I thought. And I was like, okay, well, I'm good because I'm number 2, and they're going to take the top 2. They're going to put it down at Richardson, and they're going to take the bottom 17, and they're going to put it up at Wainwright. Well, they took the top 17 and put it up at Wainwright, and they took the bottom 2 and put it down at Richardson. So I got stashed, in this place I did not want to be, but it was the greatest blessing that I ever had in my life. And God did that along the way many times, put me in spaces where I didn't think I was going to be. And actually, that's how he came to North Carolina.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. And so I did the first deployment out to Afghanistan. Had a really amazing opportunity as a young 23-year-old. I mean, I was in charge of 400 dudes at this
Wow.
small air access only combat outpost, where air access only means there's no roads that lead to it. It's all in the middle of nowhere. We were in the Arghandab Valley, kind of northeast of Kandahar, and very hotbed area. Closest boss to me or other American military was about 60 miles away. So like I was really on my own. I had 40 Americans, I had 350 Afghans, and
And
that was
was
all
that out of the gate? You were in that role when you were stationed
right out of the gate, just like that.
wow.
Yeah. So like when you talk about, I'm incredibly grateful for my experience in the military because I got to do some really hard stuff at a very young age. And it kind of like when you do that when you're 23, particularly in a lethal environment where your decisions are actually the difference between people living and dying.
Right.
Not just your guys, but also the enemy too, and how you prosecute and project American force, is up to a little rinky dink, 23-year-old. That puts some hair on your chest pretty quickly. And so
Were you 6'7" at the time?
I was, yeah, still a 6'7", so have been the biggest target on the battlefield
Right.
since I hopped in. But no, that was a very traditional special forces mission, right? A lot of foreign internal defense where we're trying to build capacity in a foreign ally, trying to get them to do most of the work as opposed to us, and kind of making incremental progress towards that, laying out the ability to do that while in a very dynamic environment. That was totally a traditional special forces mission. And so when I got back from that deployment, I was like, man, this is what I want to do. And so
Mm-hmm.
volunteered for the special forces, got picked up, came down to selection at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, back in very early 2013,
Yeah.
and then got accepted into through selection, got picked up, and then actually formally moved from Alaska with my wife down here to North Carolina to go through the Special Forces qualification course back in mid 2013. And so, we've been here now a little over 10 years,
Okay.
going on our 11th here. And so North Carolina has been our home ever since that time.
So in the midst of all of that, how do you meet your wife?
Oh my gosh, that was in the very short time that I was down at Fort Benning.
Okay.
I actually met my wife at a church in between Fort Benning and Atlanta, Georgia. She was working for AT&T corporate out of Atlanta, and I was obviously doing my training. And on Sundays when we weren't in the field, I'd go to this church. Met her at this church. The Army, we hit it off like immediately. She knew what she was looking for. I knew what I was looking for. And then when I got, stationed short final, like, hey, you're going to Alaska and it's happening now. My wife was very insistent. And we got married actually en route from Fort Benning to Alaska. So our honeymoon was actually on the Alcan Highway.
Is
And
that right?
yeah, so we both of our parents eloped, and both of our parents ingrained in us that eloping was really a bad move. And so what we did is we did like a partial elope where we called our parents on a Sunday and said, this Saturday, we're going to get married here, and you all can be there if you'd like to be there.
And were they able to come or
They were. Yeah,
they did?
It turned into like a 50-person wedding.
No way. So it
Oh
wasn't
yeah, it was totally awesome. Like, I mean, it was the best way to do a wedding because it was just like really no stress, across like a 6 or a 9 month period or whatever.
Well, nobody gets so last minute. Nobody can complain about who got to sit where and who didn't
Yeah,
get invited and
no.
all the things that usually ruin a wedding, quite frankly.
You know how weddings are usually not about the couple, right? This wedding was like actually about the couple because there
Right.
wasn't time to worry about everybody else's, gripes, complaints, and
Yep. Well,
desires,
so
right?
you someday we'll have to get together. My wife and I eloped, but it was a bit of a hybrid elope. And
Yeah,
probably the easiest way to describe it was we told our folks we were getting married, but we told them we were splitting. Like we were going out west, went to a ranch in Colorado, just the two of us, and
nice.
we went to the side of a mountain. And old Judge Purdy, who was like 91 years old, and justice of the peace kind of situation. They drug him up the mountain, and we signed the contracts on the side of a van that the rancher owned. And my mother likes to say that it was, we're getting married and you're not invited. Now, from my mom's perspective, of course, that broke my heart when she said it that way. But We had a nice little party when we got back afterwards, but it really does remove like all of the drama noise that usually happens in the build up to a wedding. So you're out of respect, your wife's name Rocky, is that right?
Rocky. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So no hesitation. She's like, "Yeah, let's go." She didn't need the traditional thing. She didn't need the princess wedding. And by the way, no offense to anybody who does need a princess wedding, but she was all in.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. She was all in, and it didn't hurt Eric that I took like every little bit of savings that I had and bought the biggest rock I possibly. She
You just wiped out the account.
she could not say no.
You just wiped out the count. You went to
That's
zero.
it.
You're like, I'm
Yep.
all in.
That's it. I'm all in. Here we go.
That's awesome. So is her family still in Georgia?
No, her family's actually from Ohio.
Oh,
So
okay. And
yeah,
where's your family?
my family's kind of splits time between California and Wyoming.
Okay. And
Yep.
doesn't your okay, I'm taking a left-hand turn here, and hopefully you
Yeah.
don't care. Isn't it your folks that own the home that got shot into a
Yeah.
couple of years ago?
Yeah. So they've got a house up near ours, like a mile and a half away from our house up in Hickory. And they had my kids. And during the time that they were watching my kids, when we were, running down on the 14th, that's when they got shot at. My kids were actually sleeping in that house. So it was, yeah, that was a very frustrating scenario.
Well, for those that don't know the story, you can Google it. But the and that's nobody's ever been caught. That's never been nobody's ever figured anything out, right?
No,
Or am I
they have
wrong about that?
nope, nope. Nobody's ever been caught. We had a number of death threats. Because look, like if you're a really conservative guy and you head into a deep blue district like we did down in Charlotte, because you want and like you got to have somebody that's going to run against the Democrat. They can't just have this echo chamber down there and not have it contested. Like it's not good, particularly from somebody that spent a lot of time in California and watched our cities completely erode the entire state.
Mhm.
North Carolina is facing that exact same prospect here because we have all these folks moving in from California and New York and New Jersey, and they're bringing their politics with them, right? So if you don't go and actually make a concerted effort to communicate a conservative message in a very productive way, if you don't stand in the gap against that kind of Democratic creep, we're going to lose this state. And so, we did what we thought was the best service we could possibly provide to the Republican Party on behalf of conservative North Carolinians to go into that deep blue seat and at least give it our very best. And we really threatened a lot of people down there because look, like I'm a super right conservative guy. I obviously make weapons for a living. But I communicate it in such a way where they can't call me crazy. And
Yeah.
that takes a lot of ammunition away from them. And we were getting death threats again, like somebody shot at our house. Like this stuff doesn't happen when really you've got a candidate that's not really a threat in that environment. But I think that was a testament to the quality of a race that we ran.
When something like that happens, did you and Rocky take a pause and say, "Man, maybe we need to go in a different direction," or did you double down from there?
Honestly, just because of my personality, it's almost like an immediate double down, right?
Mhm.
Because it's like, look, I understand what's going on here. I'm a special operator. I understand that if a family is sitting backlit in a living room watching television and somebody plows around into the laundry room, they're obviously not trying to kill somebody. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? They had the opportunity. They could have. They didn't do that. So obviously, a message is trying to be sent here. I am not going to play around, and I'm not going to run away from something like that.
Man, that's a really interesting point that I didn't think about. That you look at those things almost strategically from a very different perspective than I might, right? A
Yep.
bullet comes through my laundry room window, my kids are home. Like I don't have the expertise to sit down and really consider was somebody really trying to hurt someone, or were they trying to send a message?
Right.
Which, by the way, you and I both know people can get hurt when someone's trying to send a message. Also, some
Absolutely.
mistakes
Yep.
get made, but no,
Yep.
that's really interesting that your mind just works a little bit differently than maybe, well, certainly than most people. And it sounds like, quite frankly, your partner in life, Rocky, must be very similar.
Yeah, she's been an incredible partner. I mean, when if I was to tell you that like I'm the most blessed guy on the face of the earth, it'd be an understatement. That is a very special woman. And she's been with me every step of the way. I mean, through all these deployments, through this crazy idea of starting our business while we're still in the military, running that business, from the very beginning, particularly when I deployed, and doing stuff that she just had no experience doing whatsoever, but just totally conquered it, and did better than I ever could have imagined or asked of her. She's been an incredible resource along the way, and couldn't be more blessed to have her as a partner.
Well, I want to come back to this in a minute, but I do think that the level of value that you can get by understanding who someone associates themselves with is 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 actually very difficult to value. And I think that's something as a voter you lose somewhat, when you don't really know who are the people that this person I might vote for or against, who are the people they surround themselves with, who are the ones they take counsel from, who are the ones that they have background with at some level. And so, I'm glad you talked about that just a little bit. Before I go into that though, one of the problems you'll find with me is I've got 50 ideas in my head and I can only have time for one or two. So what have you learned by being an entrepreneur after the military? Is there anything that you've learned that maybe caused you to see the world and people a little bit differently than you had during your deployment and your time in the military?
Yeah, I'd say that there's a couple different things that I've learned across the time. Like when I first got out of the military, I got out because our business was growing so rapidly. Like I couldn't not get out. Like, it
Wow.
wasn't an option for us. Had to get out, had to focus on the business, had to continue with the growth that's going. And the one of the very first things that I learned was motivation in the civilian world is very different than motivation in the military world. And motivation in the civilian world is I'm just going to say it, it's selfish and it's purely for profit, right, at the end of the day. Whereas motivation in the military world, like, look, everybody's like cool making like 50 to 100 grand a year depending on what you're doing. Have enough money to raise your family, you got health care, you're going to fight every now and again, but like people aren't there for the money,
Right.
they are there for the purpose, and the purpose is greater than them. And in the civilian world, the purpose, there's a lot of people that you run into where the purpose can be greater than them. But in reality, when you get down to brass tacks of business and it comes down to dollars and cents, it's about dollars and cents and about what matters to them, right? And so you can't just automatically trust somebody on this side of the military base, right? Like you could when you were over here. And so that was a really poignant lesson for me to learn up front. And luckily, we didn't pay too much stupid tax learning that lesson, but we did pay a little along the way. And then the second thing that I think that I've learned is that there is no limitation to what you can achieve in this world except for you. And that, I mean, like we have the most incredible system that humanity has ever devised to allow someone to lift themselves out of poverty, out of a situation where their parents might not be wealthy, to take an idea, to foster that idea, and to solve people's problems with that idea, thereby making money, thereby growing a company, growing a business that employs people to your left and to your right, that gives them the same opportunity to do the exact same thing that you just did and replicate itself while creating money. I mean, It's unbelievable. It really is. And the only limitation that you have is limitation that you put on yourself. It's actually just constrained thinking. And that is an incredibly powerful concept. And it's one that I wish that I had understood before I left the military, because I feel like I could have been a much more effective commander having that knowledge in combat, actually. Uh,
Wow.
believe
Yeah.
it or not. And so, there's a phase for everything in life, and there's a time for everything. But that has been the most incredible lesson, and it's why I'm so passionate about preserving the system that we have and the opportunity that it affords. Because if that goes away, the world as we know it actually goes away.
I love what you just said. I hope, and we don't have time to go down, this kind of path right now, nor am I some political pundit that's smart enough to have these deep conversations anyway. But the I hope that if you get elected, and even if you don't, whatever it is you do next, because I can tell whatever that next, you're not going to stop no matter what. Like I figured that out. Um, and I have a lot of, I have a huge appreciation for that for sure. Um, and I don't disagree with you. Look, I'm 51. I've been involved in startups. Um, some successful at some level, some lots of failures along the way for sure. I don't think one exists without the other. I've learned that. I learned that very quickly and over again. But I think I've reached a point in life where I don't know that I totally agree that everybody truly has the same opportunity. I think ultimately they do have the same opportunity, but because of maybe some of the communities they live in, or the hand that they've been dealt, that they had nothing to do with, they were born into that hand potentially, that they don't even know what that opportunity is. Nobody's guiding them in the proper direction. These are certain communities that are underserved from that perspective. And just superficially, let's just be honest, a white guy coming from the military who is running a successful business, you're already going to be pegged as someone who maybe doesn't get that either. I think you do get that with what you just said. I think a challenge that I would expect that you would have, and it's going to be up to you to figure out how do you overcome it, is how do you get into those communities, right? And how do you show people how they can take part in that opportunity, which, by the way, that's the rising tide thing, right? It lifts
Right.
everybody. I mean, we end up
Yep.
with a country of much more winners and not as many losers. And I don't mean losers because they're lazy or they don't care or they're not patriotic, but just simply because they never saw that path that for whatever reason just comes naturally for you.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, one of the things that I'm concerned about as I kind of look across from a broad stroke kind of perspective is like, look, I told you I didn't come from money, my wife didn't come from money, and we kind of made our first pop of money back in 2016 when we were still in the military, and like first serious pop of money, right?
Right.
And we were kind of looking like, what do we do with this? Because like, at the end of the day, like I'm a nuclear engineer, so like I don't know anything about business. I just knew, I had more money in my account at the end of the month than at the beginning, because like I was solving people's problems, and
Right.
like what I was, people were picking up what I was putting down. But I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to scale the business. I didn't know how to. I didn't even really know how to be a good steward of what we had created. Right, honestly, from that perspective. And I didn't really have uh, the mentor base around me to help define that either, right? And so like I was like, what do people do? And I started looking at properties, and I was like, well, people invest in real estate, and that seems to be like where a lot of wealthy people put their money. And so I started looking like, okay, where do wealthy people buy? Like, okay, Martha's Vineyard, the Hamptons, all this stuff. And one of the things, we never ended up doing anything there, but one of the things that I saw at the time, and again, now this is what, like 8 years ago, is like you could get into a starter home in one of those areas for like 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, right? And I know that seems like an awful lot of money to a lot of people, right? But the reality is that an American, any American, can have a really good stock pick, can go start a business and have some marginal and incremental success over a couple of years, or can retire into a house, a home, even a second home of something that's in that realm. And today, those homes in those areas starter are like 3.4, 3.5,
Hmm.
3.6.
Yeah.
And what people don't realize is that takes a completely different level of income in order to step into a house like that. And what I'm concerned about is that what you're seeing through that in that very relatively short period of time, 8 years, is that you're seeing social mobility start to slow and it start to degrade. And that social mobility is the heart and essence of what America has always been, the ability to come from nothing and make yourself into something. And that's becoming much, much harder because, there's a lot of people that are killing it right now, but those people are up here, you know what I
Yep.
mean? And the folks down here are really struggling. Like things are incredibly expensive. Interest rates are not providing a permissive environment for them to be successful. And, I'm worried, just kind of like what you said, that there's this, we're eroding the middle class and there's a segment of the population that's becoming trapped and isn't going to know how to get out. And so to the extent that I agree with what you said, Eric, I'm very passionate about doing my very best to make sure that those opportunities remain consistent and we can keep opening people's minds to have that internal locus of control, that they control their own financial destiny and not the system or some circumstance or some concept that they didn't have the same opportunity to have the same outcome. Like we got to throw all of that aside, as any entrepreneur does, and say, okay, I got one more thing to overcome, but
Right.
I'm going to overcome it, right? And that's the mentality that leads people to be successful. That's the same mentality that leads this country to be successful and to lead the free world.
Well, and that clearly you have the desire to help show people that path and be a part of that path. I love that you touched on housing. Our the business that I'm in supports real estate finance and housing. Our
Mhm.
technology is tied to real estate finance and housing. And on the one hand, it's really nice to partner with companies that are crushing it, that can afford to scale with technologies like ours. Um, on the other hand, sometimes you can see that these companies may be growing by taking advantage of the things, just market conditions, not their fault. They're not creating the market conditions necessarily, but then starts to leave out an entire segment of the country, of a particular consumer base. And look, I've got a 23-year-old and a 20-year-old, two sons.
Yep.
And I tell you, and I'm sure they're going to listen to this, and Abe and Tate, I have full faith in your success. However, at the moment, it's very hard to picture in the short term how they're going to be able to afford a house anytime soon. And I'm not talking about the 1.3s and the 3.5s. I'm talking about the ones that were the 250K houses that are now
Right.
$600,000 houses. And even if they get great jobs making good money, it's going to take them a minute to build up enough wealth to afford not only the down payment on those homes, but the rates, considering where rates continue to go. I mean, they went up, then they came down just a little bit, but also the upkeep and all the things necessary to build wealth around real estate, like what you were just saying. I would guess you feel the same way with young kids as well. That you don't, if their financial success is on the backs of what their parents did. I mean, look, I'm not saying that's a terrible thing, but that's not helping the communities necessarily that didn't have that opportunity because there was no generational wealth that existed in the first place. So it's refreshing to hear you say those things, and I think important for people to know that that's part of who you are.
Yeah, no, definitely. And totally agree and appreciate that, Eric. And we've got some serious structural challenges ahead of us. I mean, there's no question about it. But I think we got to do what we can to try to bust through those barriers and create opportunity for the next generation of Americans that, guys like you and I were able to enjoy. Like I've got, 20 something employees that pre-COVID, I was like, look, they were like, Pat, what do I do? I was buy a house, buy a house, buy a house. I mean, rates are like 2% right now.
Right. It's free
Go buy
money.
a house. And
Yeah.
now they, a couple of these guys didn't. And, now you're staring 6.57 in the face. And not only 6.57 higher interest rate, but you're also looking at a higher cost of asset. And those two things don't mix. And so they're just like they're kind of stuck in, if you look at home ownership as a traditional builder of wealth in this country, and you set somebody back in that trajectory 10 years because they've got to rent for 10 more years, making those commercial real estate investors that much more wealthy. In the process, they're transferring that wealth from the folks that can't afford it to the folks that have ample and excess. And, that's not necessarily wrong, but it is unfortunate that we have created those market conditions to allow that to happen. And it didn't have to be that way.
Sure. Well, I've got you and I could go for another hour, man. I
Oh
have
yeah,
no doubt. And maybe we do this again. I hope to spend some
sure.
time with you in person at some point for sure. I got a couple of other questions. So tell me something about you that generally doesn't come up in conversation, that generally doesn't come up in an interview, on a debate stage, or when you're having to, talk about your resume, so to speak. Tell me something people wouldn't normally know about you from conversations like this.
Yeah, I'm a avid inventor. I love creating stuff. So, I've got a number of different patents now, a number of different patents pending, mainly, in the firearms industry. But, some very forward-looking stuff about, not the way things are today, but the way that things probably need to be in the future to either
Hmm.
deal certain strategic threats that we have, the ability of this country to proliferate arms that serves our strategic interest, but not have that come and recoil and boomerang back and hit us in the head, right?
Right.
Like has happened so many times over the last couple decades. There's a lot of stuff that I'm very interested in. As a former nuclear engineer that spent half my time with weapons. There's a lot of stuff that I carry forward with me into kind of new and intelligent firearms design, and I'm very passionate about that.
What is there something that that is a weakness of yours that you need to continue to work on?
Yes, I think that a lot of times somebody's greatest strength is also their greatest weakness. And sometimes I truly believe like my greatest strength is force of character, and I've known that about myself for a long time. um, Sometimes that may preclude me from seeing the benefit that others can bring to the table, even if their force of character is not necessarily as strong, or if I perhaps perceive it as even weak. And so that's something that I'm always cognizant about. And my wife is always reminding me to be just like, hey, a little bit softer. Not
I love
everybody's
that.
like you, right?
Yep.
And you have been afforded many different opportunities to lead and shepherd people along the way. And you need to act in a manner that is humble is not necessarily the right word, but just maybe more understanding, right? Of different people's situations and their struggles, maybe perhaps what they've had to deal with in their lives, and see through that to see, okay, hey, what can this person bring to the table? What are they trying to bring to the table? That maybe just needs to be tweaked a little bit, and it would be perceived very differently.
Well, thank you, Rocky. I would agree. I tell you something I've learned and listening to you and thinking about, the path ahead for you and how challenging it must be, but also you're built for this. So I don't worry about you as a human, right? I think you're clearly built for this. But the reality is your success is going forward going to have a lot to do with the rooms that you're invited into, quite frankly. And if your strength of character, so to speak, keeps you from getting in some of those rooms, that's going to be a problem, right? Because I mean, you've seen my biggest concern about our political environment, and it's not just politics, man. In my opinion, it crosses over just about everything at this point, is that everybody thinks they already know the answer. And
Right.
so if there's a problem to be solved, they're more than happy to tell you what the problem is. But if you have some ideas that can help lead towards a solution, but it doesn't start with the way that they think it should start or the group should think it should start, well, then you never actually get there. You never take that first step. And I was taught long ago, I was invited into a group, actually helped was on the board of advisors of the local Black Achievers program, and I
Mhm.
was the only white guy in the room. And that group taught me something that related to this very, very quickly. And it was, you sort of have to check yourself a little bit. If your goal, if your desired outcome is the solution to the problem, well, then why get caught up in digging your heels in before you've even been invited into the room just yet? Soften up just a little bit, see things from somebody else's perspective for a moment. And then maybe you get into the room, and before you know it, you're all part of the same room
Yeah.
now. And so
Right.
I applaud Rocky. I applaud you for recognizing that, and I hope that you're someone that can help decrease that divisiveness. Because honestly, I think that's one of our biggest problems right now is that we never end up in that room together, and if we don't, whatever problems exist, they're just not going to get solved. That can's just going to get kicked.
Yeah, I think you're right, Eric. And I think you probably understand this as much as any other entrepreneur, right? But if you step back and you kind of think about all the people who are around you that are really successful, and then the people, there's that kind of, I don't know. There's this category of person that is really capable, but has not necessarily found that success, right?
uh,
Person, right? And I think you step back and you kind of look at it from an unemotional perspective, detach the friendship or whatever it may be. And I think like I've come to a position where I realize that I think most leaders know what the right decision to make is. I really do. I think what separates really successful leaders from leaders who are less successful is actually timing, is when to make certain decisions. And I think that the problem that we face as a country is really best solved in the concept of timing because, look, there's a time for everything, right? There's a time to fight, there is a time to negotiate, there's a time to compromise, there is a time for, A, B, C, D, and E. Um, what is the timing right now? And what is going to be the timing in January of next year after the next crop of, congressmen take office? Because that time is going to be very different than right now. A year from now, there's so much that's going to happen in this country, good, bad, and otherwise, that I think like we're in just a very rapid period of change. And so you just got to put people up there that listen to their constituents, number one, that have experience and can synthesize those two things in light of historical principle and say, what is the best course of action that this country needs right now to solve, problem A, B, or C, and which one of those problems should be first. And so I don't think it's terribly difficult to get this country to a point where we need to go. But I do think coming back, it is going to take that force of character, because we don't seem to have that force of character right now in our government. And I think that everybody sees that we're missing it.
Well, man, that's a great way to end. The timing, I agree. I'm going to give you some of your time back now today. And look, before we break, thank you for your service. Thank you for Rocky and her service, quite frankly, because I know it doesn't work with just one person. It's a family affair. Both your service in the military as well as you and your family's desire to step up in this particular role that you're playing right now. So thank you for that. I hope some people learn a little something about you that maybe they didn't know otherwise. And honestly, next time I see you, I look forward to actually going for a real walk together
Heck
and
yeah.
not a virtual walk. But
Yep.
thanks for carving out some time today. I something tells me this won't be the last time we speak.
Eric, I really enjoyed it and truly appreciate your perspective. I look forward to crossing paths with you again in the very near future.
That's the deal. Thanks for coming on the walk, my friend.
Hey, thanks very much. We'll see ya.